The cameras kept rolling, but nobody in the studio understood what they were witnessing. Canon O'Brien had stopped mid-joke, his trademark grin faltering as he stared at something that made no sense. A teenage girl stood at the guest podium wearing shoes that were at least 3 sizes too big, shoes that belonged to someone else, someone who should have been there but wasn't. And when those oversized leather shoes slipped off her feet for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, Canon did something that broke every rule of late-night television. He walked across the stage, knelt down, and began unlacing his own polished Oxford shoes. The entire studio fell silent. This wasn't comedy anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was something deeper, something that reminded everyone watching that some moments transcend television and touch the very core of what it means to be human. Let me take you back to how we got to this extraordinary moment that would change everything for a family from Denver and a late-night host who thought he'd seen it all. It was a Tuesday evening at the Late Night with Canon O'Brien Studios in New York City. The energy was electric as it always was during Canon's show tapings. His signature red hair caught the studio lights as he worked the audience during his monologue, his tall frame moving with the practiced ease of someone who had mastered the art of late-night entertainment. Canon was wearing his favorite navy blue suit, the one that brought out his eyes and made him feel confident during the most challenging interviews. The Martinez family had been selected from thousands of applications to appear on Canon's popular Everyday Heroes segment, where ordinary people shared extraordinary stories of resilience and hope. 16-year-old Sofia Martinez sat in the green room, nervously adjusting the simple black dress her aunt had helped her pick out for the occasion. But it was what she wore on her feet that had been causing whispered conversations among the production staff. The shoes were enormous. Brown leather dress shoes, clearly meant for a grown man, probably size 12 compared to Sofia's size 7 feet. They were well maintained but showed the gentle wear of someone who had walked countless miles in them, someone who had stood proudly at school events and family gatherings. As Sofia walked to the guest chair, the shoes made soft shuffling sounds against the polished studio floor, threatening to slip off with every step. During the pre-interview, Canon's producer had discreetly suggested that Sofia might be more comfortable in different footwear, but she had quietly but firmly declined. "These are the right shoes for tonight," she had said, her voice carrying a determination that surprised the production team. They had learned over the years that Canon preferred authentic moments over perfect aesthetics, so they had decided to let it be. Canon had noticed the shoes immediately during their brief meet and greet backstage. His comedian's eye was trained to spot the unusual, the incongruous, the details that could become material. But something in Sofia's demeanor, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her 16 years, had made him file the observation away rather than comment on it. The interview segment began with Canon's signature warmth. He had a gift for making guests feel comfortable, for creating an intimate conversation even in front of a studio audience of 300 people. Sofia's mother, Elena, sat in the front row with tears already threatening to spill. Her younger son, Miguel, 10 years old, sat beside her, his eyes wide with the excitement of being in a real television studio. "So, Sofia," Canon began, settling into his host chair with that easy confidence that had made him one of America's most beloved late-night personalities. "I understand your family has been through quite a journey this year. Tell us a little about what brought you here tonight." Sofia shifted in the guest chair, and as she did, her right shoe slipped off entirely, landing on the carpeted studio floor with a muffled thud. She quickly bent down to retrieve it, her cheeks flushing red as a few audience members chuckled sympathetically. "Sorry," she mumbled, slipping the oversized shoe back onto her foot. "They're a bit loose." Canon's eyebrows raised slightly in that expressive way that had become one of his trademark reactions. "No need to apologize. Comfort is overrated anyway," he said with a gentle smile that put Sofia at ease. "Take your time." But as Sofia began to share her story, the shoes became increasingly problematic. Every gesture, every shift in position caused one or both shoes to slide off her feet. She would pause mid-sentence to retrieve them, growing more flustered with each incident. The audience's initial amusement gradually gave way to concern as they realized this wasn't a comedy bit but something more personal. "We moved to Denver about 8 months ago," Sofia was saying, trying to maintain her composure while simultaneously trying to keep her feet properly positioned in the massive shoes. "It was hard leaving everything we knew, especially after." She paused as both shoes slipped off this time, and instead of immediately reaching for them, she sat there in her stocking feet, looking down at the brown leather shoes as if they held the answers to questions she couldn't voice. "After my dad died," she finished quietly. The studio audience fell completely silent. Canon felt his chest tighten, recognizing the particular kind of grief that came with sudden loss, the way it could make even simple things like wearing shoes feel impossible. "I'm so sorry, Sofia," Canon said, his voice losing all trace of his professional broadcaster tone. This was just Canon, the man, responding to a young person in pain. "How long ago did you lose him?" 6 months, Sofia replied, and now tears were flowing freely down her face. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. The precision of her answer revealed how closely she had been counting, how present the loss still was in her daily life. As emotion overwhelmed her, Sofia kicked both shoes away in frustration, then immediately scrambled to collect them, sobbing now. "I can't even keep them on," she whispered, clutching the shoes against her chest. "I promised him I would wear them tonight, and I can't even keep them on my feet." That's when Canon O'Brien stopped being a late-night talk show host and became something else entirely. Canon had been hosting television for 15 years. He had interviewed celebrities, politicians, authors, and ordinary people with extraordinary stories. He had developed a professional distance that allowed him to navigate emotional moments without losing his composure or his ability to guide the conversation. But something about this moment, this teenage girl clutching her father's shoes while trying to honor a promise she had made to someone who would never see her on television, shattered every barrier he had built. He stood up from his chair, abandoning his note cards, his carefully planned questions, his entire show format. The cameras kept rolling, but Canon wasn't thinking about ratings or timing or commercial breaks. He was thinking about a 16-year-old girl who was wearing her dead father's shoes because it was the only way she could feel his presence during the most important moment of her young life. "Sofia," Canon said, walking around his desk toward the guest area, his voice carrying none of his usual theatrical energy. "Can you tell me about those shoes? What made them special to your dad?" Sofia looked up at him, her makeup streaked with tears, still holding the brown leather shoes like they were sacred relics. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. "He called them his celebration shoes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wore them to every important family event. My quinceañera, Miguel's first communion, Mom's nursing school graduation. He said they were lucky, that they helped him stand tall when he was proud of his family." Canon felt something break open in his chest. Behind the cameras, his production team was gesturing frantically, trying to figure out how to handle this unscripted emotional moment that was clearly going far beyond their planned segment time. But Canon couldn't see them anymore. His entire focus was on this brave young woman who was trying to carry her father's pride on her own small feet. "When did you lose him?" Canon asked, sitting down on the edge of his desk, abandoning all pretense of formal hosting. "December 15th. Heart attack at work. He was only 43. Sofia's voice cracked on the numbers. "The paramedics said he probably didn't suffer, but I keep thinking about how he died alone, how none of us got to say goodbye." "And wearing his shoes tonight? That was a promise you made to him?" Sofia nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Not exactly. I made the promise at his funeral. I told him that when I got on television someday, when I achieved something that would make him proud, I would wear his celebration shoes so he could be there with me." Canon O'Brien had made thousands of people laugh over his career. He had perfected the art of finding humor in everyday situations, of making light of life's absurdities. But in this moment, he understood that laughter wasn't what was needed. What was needed was recognition, validation, and the kind of human connection that transcended entertainment. Without saying a word, Canon knelt down and began unlacing his own shoes. The studio audience watched in complete bewilderment as their favorite late-night host removed his polished black Oxford shoes and set them carefully beside his desk. Then he looked directly at Sofia, his blue eyes serious in a way the audience had rarely seen. "Put your dad's shoes back on," he said gently. "But they don't fit," Sofia protested, confusion replacing some of her grief. "They're not supposed to fit you yet," Canon replied, his voice carrying a weight that surprised everyone in the studio, including himself. "They're supposed to fit the woman you're becoming, the woman your father knew you would grow into, the woman he was already proud of." Sofia slipped the oversized shoes back onto her feet, and Canon nodded with satisfaction. "Now," he said, still kneeling beside her chair, "tell me what your father would say if he could see you here tonight." For the first time since the interview began, Sofia's face lit up with a genuine smile. "He would probably make a joke about how I'm finally tall enough to reach the top shelf," she said, laughing through her tears. "And then he would tell everyone in the studio about how I've been accepted to 3 different colleges with scholarships and how I want to study engineering just like he did." Canon grinned, and for a moment his natural comedic timing returned. "Engineering, huh? So you're saying you come by the problem-solving skills naturally. I bet you could figure out how to make those shoes fit." "Actually," Sofia said, her confidence growing, "I've been working on that. I stuffed tissue paper in the toes and added extra insoles. They're still loose, but I can walk in them now, without tripping." "That's very practical," Canon said. "Very engineering-minded. Your dad would be impressed." The audience had been silent during this exchange, but now they began to applaud. Not the typical television applause that was prompted by producers, but a spontaneous outpouring of emotion from 300 people who had just witnessed something real and beautiful. But Canon wasn't finished. He stood up, walked to his desk, and returned with a piece of Late Night with Canon O'Brien letterhead and a pen. He sat back down beside Sofia and began writing. "What are you doing?" Sofia asked, curious now rather than overwhelmed. "I'm writing you a letter," Canon said, his pen moving quickly across the paper. "A letter that you can read whenever wearing those shoes feels too hard, whenever you doubt that you're growing into them properly." He finished writing and handed the letter to Sofia. "But more importantly, I'm writing my personal phone number on the back. Because, Sofia, when you graduate from engineering school, when you design your first building or bridge or whatever amazing thing you're going to create, I want you to call me. I want to celebrate with you, because your dad can't be there to do it himself." Sofia took the letter with shaking hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You really mean that?" "I absolutely mean that," Canon said firmly. "And Sofia, I want you to keep wearing those shoes to every important event in your life. Wear them to graduation. Wear them to job interviews. Wear them when you get your first promotion. Wear them until they fit perfectly, because when they finally do, you'll know you've become exactly who your father always believed you could be." Sofia stood up, wobbling slightly in the oversized shoes, and without hesitation, she hugged Canon O'Brien. It wasn't a polite television hug designed for the cameras. It was the desperate embrace of a young woman who had been carrying an impossible weight and had just been told that it was okay to set it down, that someone understood the magnitude of what she was trying to do. Canon held her for a long moment, and then he whispered something in her ear that the studio microphones couldn't pick up. Whatever he said made Sofia nod vigorously and smile through her tears. As they separated, Canon addressed the studio audience directly, something he rarely did during guest interviews. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying an authority that commanded absolute attention, "what Sofia has shown us tonight is what real courage looks like. It's not about being fearless, it's about being afraid and showing up anyway. It's about wearing shoes that don't fit because someone you loved believed you would grow into them." He gestured toward Sofia, who was standing proudly now despite the obvious impracticality of her footwear. "Sofia Martinez is going to change the world someday, and when she does, she's going to do it wearing her father's shoes. And that, folks, is what we call a happy ending in progress." The applause that followed was unlike anything the Late Night with Canon O'Brien show had ever experienced. It wasn't just applause for entertainment, it was applause for recognition, for truth, for the kind of moment that reminded everyone present why human connection matters more than perfect television. Behind the scenes, Canon's producers were scrambling to figure out how this emotional detour would affect their show timing, but Canon made it clear that they weren't cutting a single second. "This airs exactly as it happened," he told them firmly. "Every tear, every stumble, every moment. Because this is what television should be sometimes. This is what real stories look like." When the show returned from commercial break, Canon was back at his desk, but he was still in his stocking feet. He held up his own shoes for the camera to see. "So, I'm sitting here in my socks," he said with a self-deprecating grin that his audience loved. "And you know what? I think I might start a trend. Because sometimes the most comfortable thing you can do is take off the shoes that fit perfectly and remember what it feels like to be growing into something bigger." The episode aired 3 weeks later and became the most-watched Late Night with Canon O'Brien episode in the show's 15-year history. More importantly, it sparked a movement. Viewers began sharing their own stories about inherited items that were too big, too small, or somehow imperfect but carried immense emotional significance. Social media filled with photos of people wearing clothes, jewelry, or shoes that had belonged to lost loved ones, along with stories about growing into the legacy those items represented. Sofia kept her promise to wear her father's shoes to important events. She wore them to her high school graduation, where she was valedictorian. She wore them to her first day at MIT, where she studied civil engineering, and she wore them to her college graduation, where Canon O'Brien, true to his word, was waiting in the audience to celebrate with her. By then, the shoes fit perfectly. But the most beautiful part of the story happened 7 years after that night on television. Sofia, now a successful structural engineer, returned to Canon's show as a guest. This time, she was wearing her own professional shoes, ones that fit properly and reflected her grown-up status. But she brought her father's shoes with her, now carefully preserved and displayed in a shadow box, along with Canon's letter and several photos from important moments in her life. "These shoes taught me something fundamental," she told Canon during the interview, both of them now older but Canon's eyes still holding the same warmth that had made that original moment possible. "They taught me that love isn't about perfect fits. It's about growing into the space that someone's belief in you creates." Canon, his red hair now showing threads of silver but his smile as genuine as ever, leaned forward with interest. "And did you? Did you grow into that space?" Sofia's smile was radiant, the same smile she had found that night 7 years earlier when she stopped worrying about the impossibility of her father's shoes and started focusing on the love that had put them on her feet. "I grew into something even better," she said. "I grew into someone who knows how to help other people build strong foundations, literally and figuratively. I design buildings now, Canon. Buildings that will stand for generations, just like the love my father built into our family." The studio audience applauded, but this time it was different. It was the applause of completion, of a story that had come full circle, of promises kept by both a talk show host who gave away his dignity for a grieving teenager and a young woman who learned that the best way to honor someone's memory is to become worthy of their faith in you. And somewhere in Denver, in a house where a family had learned to be whole again, even with a piece missing, Miguel Martinez was preparing for his own college applications. He was 17 now, the same age his sister had been when she learned to walk in impossible shoes. And hanging in his closet, waiting for his own moment of celebration, was another pair of his father's shoes, because some gifts are meant to be passed down, some love is meant to be grown into, and some shoes are meant to be too big until the day they're not.